gathered together from the cosmic reaches of the universe. Here, in this great hall of the Signal Watch, are the most powerful forces of good ever assembled. Join us as we discuss all manner of topics across the multiverse of comic books, history, creators, storylines, movies, and more. The Signal Watch podcast presents Kryptonian Thought Beast, a comics podcast series dedicated to truth, justice, and peace for all mankind.
Well, so this is
that's the mint one.
And dark chocolate. So this is, hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host Ryan Steens, and you are joining us for part 2 of the Smallville podcast.
Somebody save me!
From even more Smallville talk. We're also doing a taste test of Kit Kat Duo's mint and dark chocolate. That's mint and dark chocolate.
I have a hypothesis that this is going to be delicious. I'm correct.
That's really good.
It's really good. I also can't eat too much of that right now.
I can. Mm-hmm. Man.
Very good.
I'm going to recommend...
Thumbs up.
Not brought to you by Kit Kat, but we are certainly endorsing.
Maybe we'll get sent crates and crates of Kit Kats now.
Yes. If Mr. Cat wants to send us... Or Ms. Cat, I should check my privilege. Wants to send me any...
or candy.
Candy. I would certainly take it. So, we just spent about a little over an hour talking about kind of
about Jamie's issues.
We
My
had
therapy session.
Jamie's therapy session. And now we're gonna have Ryan's. So I talked a bit last hour. If you haven't listened to the first episode, we talked kind of a lot of generalities, kind of like the feelings we had around Smallville and kind of how we came to it and kind of how we exited the show. Sort of. I think we talked.
No one really leaves Smallville.
No one ever leaves Smallville. And kind of like what our expectations were and kind of what the show was, sort of. I think it's fascinating going back. We just watched episodes across 10 seasons. Not all of them, but a number. And to see kind of how the show thought of itself and kind of changed over those years. And we talked about kind of the rocky patch we felt they'd hit kind of little past midway. Mm-hmm. And then they really found their footing and kind of ended.
It just became a different show.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of true throughout the history of the show. They really wanted to go for this like young, naive Clark who's kind of coming off the farm and does shit like stumbles in front of the pretty girl and it's like, gosh, you know.
Gosh, I look like a model.
Yeah. And so I think in some ways the casting of Welling, while totally making sense, like, you know, as someone who is currently 6'5", by the time I hit 13, I was like 6'3". Mm-hmm. So I understand, like, you can't go from being a small person to being a... And so, in some ways, I thought the casting really did work pretty well there. But then I feel like we talked a bit about how they tried to turn it into a little bit more of like an adult show, and they were doing, even when they were in high school, doing like adult things.
Yeah, well, that was a big problem that they had because they were insistent upon not turning him into Superman until the very, very end of the show, and therefore he kept having to learn lessons for 10 years, and they became the same lessons. And it became really repetitive. And, like, either this guy's a total dumbass or emotionally stunted or he just forgets. Like, it did not speak well of the character.
I think that the show has a problem. One of its major problems was, I don't think the writers knew who Superman is as a character.
That's fair.
I think they had an idea of who Clark was on their show, but getting from that kid who's like flopping in front of Lana Lang in the pilot to Superman in the comics and as portrayed by Christopher Reeve and you know, I would even argue in Lois and Clark and now in Superman and Lois, is a figure who kind of gets by a bit on being everybody's buddy and being really confident when he shows up. He's the ball player who, when you go to the ballpark, is happy to see you are there and is going to sign your baseball. He is not the guy who is Batman, who's going to be like, I do batting practice and then I disappear and I don't talk to the fans. And he's the guy who is going to notice, you know, a cat in a tree or, you know, a teenager crying, you know, hanging out outside their house. Like, that is Superman. And as much as Superman, Superman and Lois, I know Jamie last hour was like, I don't like this one thing about it, but I think we can agree.
It's a good show.
Yeah. That, like, there were some moments, particularly in season 2, where, like, Superman was saving the day around the planet. Not the Daily Planet, but the actual planet. And when they show it, he doesn't just leap into action. He stops and checks to make sure everybody's okay at the end of it. He's not a tortured guy like the Zack Snyder movies would lead you to believe, like, I don't want to have to do this, but I guess I'm the guy.
He also doesn't burn his symbol with his heat vision on every piece of property,
creating thousands of dollars in damage.
Looking at you, Smallville. Like, what the hell?
There's a real obsession in the show because they needed to figure out what to talk about, and they wanted to keep it in line with the comics of all of the Kryptonian stuff, which, fair enough. I think it's also fair to say they overdid it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't just mean like Zod showing up for a whole season or Brainiac being from Krypton and all that. I mean, the whole thing of him like struggling against his Kryptonian heritage. They never gave an example of why he would lean into that.
Other than
he was told to.
Other than Jor-El was kind of a dick sometimes, and sometimes he wasn't. Like, there's some really weird things going on with Jor-El.
It was super inconsistent.
Yeah.
It really leaned into the idea of both. Depending on which episode you watched, they'd be like, "Oh, it's, you know, this destiny that you have in front of you, or this fate you have in front of you," and other times they'd be like free will, and they really struggled with that on the show.
Well, they also had the first time I think he heard anything from his home world was the episode Rosetta with Christopher Reeve. Was when he first got like the message from his home world, and his spaceship finally talked to him.
Yeah,
and he was able to read it, and it said, "We are sending you to rule Earth," and that was actually a really like interesting moment. You're like, "Oh my God, where are they going to go with this?" And then they kind of didn't do anything with it. Like, you don't really want him to like rule the world, but I mean, it looked like they were trying to do something new and different, and then they just dropped it. So it was very inconsistent.
Yeah, and I never really got that it made sense that yeah, because Jor-El was so inconsistent, but like why had he actually sent, like in the original comics, literally they're like, hey, this planet's about to blow, that planet looks safe, go baby. They don't know he's going to be,
that makes sense to me.
yeah, that he's going to be leaping, tall buildings or any of that. That's unknown science for them. Later, I think in the Silver Age already they knew that might happen. But certainly by the time we get to post-crisis in the 80s when they did Man of Steel, that's the thing that was based loosely on kind of the screenplay of Superman the movie, where John Byrne kind of adapts it, and Lara is like, oh my god, these heathen species that like shows their bare skin to the world, like, oh my god, they're grotesque, you can't send our children among these barbarians. And Jor-El's like, it's gonna be fine. Like, our kid's gonna be able to like leap tall buildings, blah blah blah. So, but there's an idea of the savior that I think really came out of Superman the movie more than almost any other thing. Like, there's not really an idea when Jor-El and Lara send Kal-El off that he is going to rule, that he's going to... But Superman the movie has these great bits of dialogue that I assume were Tom Mankiewicz that are, they just need a light to show them the way, these sorts of things. But the show kind of kept wanting to do this sort of lazy thing of, well, he's going to defy the expectations of the alien father who we never really have to see. And so he's bucking the trend and he's going to buck dad. But then the next episode, they're like, no, my son,
yeah,
I would be nice this week.
Go ask your ice dad what to do.
Yeah.
And then he goes
Yeah.
and he talks to him.
Yeah. The show, I think, also had major issues with Superman in the comics. I would say the romance between Lois and Clark mostly got played out up until like 90. Well, really, he was killed in 92. That was the Doomsday stuff, but it was assumed, there was a whole title called Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, that ran from like the 50s for like 20 years until it got merged into Superman Family. But he was like going on picnics and shit with her. Like, it wasn't, there was an idea that, yeah, of course, you're my girl, but I can't marry you because, I gotta be here for the whole world sort of thing. She didn't know he was Clark. There was a lot of stuff actually with adult Lana moving into Metropolis, and they became roommates, Lois and Lana.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but they still hated each other because they're both competing for Superman's affection.
Of course.
And so yeah, you got to do all that kind of stuff. It's not until you start getting into kind of the period of the 90s where they go, you know what, we've kind of set these two up since the 80s to actually like kind of fall for each other. She's fallen for Clark as much as she initially was attracted to Superman, but Superman was a story Lois was chasing in that context. He wasn't, and he might be good looking, but it's like a sports reporter doesn't assume they're going to marry, the ball player sort of thing. But she might, start dating someone from The Office or something like that. So I'm not saying these things are impossible, but it's kind of how they anyway treated it. And I think the romance in this ended up leading to all kinds of stuff of just making Clark look bad up until like the 8th season.
For multiple reasons. One, he was lying to all of his girlfriends.
Yeah.
Starting with Lana and then continuing on with Lois until like season 10 was when she found out the secret. But also, I think it really did a disservice to his relationship with Lois and them trying to sell that they're the greatest love story of all time, in that they kept bringing Lana back as a love interest and like setting her up as, oh, well, she's his one true first love. And even after he had started like kind of making eyes at Lois, they bring Lana back for like 5 episodes. It was like a contract deal, so Christian Kirk came back for 5 episodes in season 8. And of course, they couldn't let that die or let them like part as normal humans would. As a mature relationship, it had to be.
Sometimes you see an ex and you have a good time seeing them, but it's not. You're not like, sitting there like
we're different people now, which would have been great. It would have been really cool if they had done that. But instead, they made it so that Alana had gone off and gotten herself a kryptonite suit embedded in her skin so that she could be superhero. And then he couldn't be around her physically, and that's how they broke up.
And it also left, like, these niggling details of, like, oh, you have evil Kryptonians running around? Well, maybe you should just bring in Alana.
Yes.
Fly her in for the weekend.
I mean, again, Kristen Crook wasn't contracted for season 9, but the big bad of season 9 was a bunch of Kryptonians. She would have been really useful.
Yeah.
But instead, they just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hated that they did that for the Clark and Lois relationship. Like, they had to like go in full force starting in season 9 as he's only coming back to humanity for Lois. I'm like, well, you haven't shown that to us before now. You're just telling us.
Yeah.
It's like you need to plan better, do some better storytelling.
Yeah.
This is lazy.
And there was a lot of stuff of them like needing to connect those dots of and maybe the Superman of Smallville's world is not the Superman I think of. He could be more of a Henry Cavill sort of Superman, but the whole refusing to put glasses on him. And I don't know what Welling was willing to do or not willing to do, because he's an executive producer by the time you get to like season 8. And so I'm sure he had some say in the room, but it kind of all culminates with they finally forced the glasses onto him on like the 3rd to the last episode or something like that, and he still isn't wearing them.
He's still not wearing them.
And in fact is going to have his wedding photos apparently taken without them. And so
it was such a weird thing, like how resistant Clark was to wear the damn glasses, even though it was his idea in the first place, that I have to believe that was a Welling thing. Like, it just felt so much like behind the scenes messing hands all over it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the telling thing really dumb. Is the we're not going to show him in the suit. So, I don't know if I was, air quote excited about the finale, but I was like, well, we'll finally see Welling in the suit after all these years of nonsense. Which I understood, but I was like, the obvious thing, the fan service thing, the thing that you're going to do to like nail it is have a minute of him in the suit.
Flying around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he didn't fucking do it. No.
It was all these like trick shots of like just his head or the far shot or clips literally from Superman Returns of him floating over the earth. That is not him. That is a CG Brandon Routh.
Yeah. And, before we watched the finale, I dug up this video from when the thing aired of this guy, like, yelling, "God bless America!"
Losing his absolute mind over the whole sequence.
Yeah, and he's like, "Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. Oh, it's so awesome. It's so beautiful." And I hate to, like, drag on some dude's, like, reaction video from, like, 10 years ago, But
come on.
But come on, dude. And it was bad.
It was real bad.
The whole finale, I have a blog post out there that's basically titled "Dropping the Ball at the 1 yard line." Because that's what it feels like. Yeah. It's like the season 10 is probably the most coherent season they've had in some ways, despite the things that you're like, you should have done that way earlier and whatnot. But the whole time you're watching the show, you're like, but why? But why? Because it's so soapy, and they're just having a really hard time. You can tell from episode to episode, keeping things straight, understanding like even how things work in the world, and all of that's just TV, or was TV a few years ago. But it just was so weird that they kind of just failed to deliver
The last episode.
And going right back to starting over. It was like they rebooted all of the Lois and Clark problems.
Yes.
I mean, so you have to sit through it again.
It was a 2-hour finale. They spent the entire first hour, basically, of alternately Lois and then Clark, and then Lois and then Clark, like, deciding they weren't ready to get married, and then they had to talk to other people about it, and then they had to talk to each other, but like, oh my god. And then we had to hear their vows like twice.
And then they have a wedding.
Yeah.
And they can't just leave well enough alone. Like, they couldn't hold the wedding till after the apocalypse stuff happened. And I'm like, people, like, there's nothing happens after this. It's another thing if you're like, we're going to hold the wedding till another season. But I don't understand why they don't, like, look, you've been in here with us for 200 something episodes. You're going to just see fan service for the next hour. That's all they had to do.
I feel like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, because they wanted to give the fans a big wedding, a flashy wedding. But I also feel like DC maybe told them you can't have them get married before he's Superman.
DC did not care. DC.
Well, then that's dumb.
It was dumb.
That's always been my theory.
We talked last episode about they came up with all these rules for themselves
Yeah.
of how the show was going to work. And then they pursued those whether they made sense or not. And I think that was kind of an artifact of that kind of TV at that point. But I did not understand at all why they didn't just give people things.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of owe people something at the end. Like, imagine how differently you would have felt about the finale if they were like heading to the wedding and then he had to go deal with Apocalypse, and then afterward he and Lois actually exchange vows and they're like, we're together. I mean, everyone would remember that.
That would be great. Yeah.
But instead you have a room full of extras, by the way.
Yeah, it was literally just who was at their wedding. So Chloe and Oliver were standing for them, and then Jeff the intern walked Martha down the aisle.
Was that really who did it?
Those are the
Well, it was John Schneider and Annette.
Well, but it was Ghost John Schneider.
Yeah. But yeah, this show has been going on at this point for 10 years, 200 something episodes. You've met tons of characters, some of whom were in episodes just before.
You could have paid those people to be there for 5 minutes.
And that's the kind of stuff that I think, like, when you watch like the Marvel shows now, they know that kind of stuff. They're like, let's not TV them. And it genuinely is what I used to think of, like, TV was just always a lesser medium, because it felt like they were constantly making the worst choices possible on shows. And Smallville was very frequently that.
Yeah.
Of how different of a show would Smallville have been had at the beginning of season 2, like, that's when Chloe knew. Like, so they tried to base it around the comics a little bit. In the comics, Pete knows. He goes camping with Clark, and an emergency happens, and Clark jumps out of the tent and changes into his Superboy togs. And a lightning flash happens while Pete's looking out the crack. And he's like, oh my God. Like, oh my God. And he doesn't tell Clark.
Yeah.
And so in this, I can't remember how they set it up for Pete knowing, but he knew for like half a season and then was off the show or something. Maybe a season and a half. It
was something similar, like Pete was about to get hit by a car or something, and Clark had to stop it in front of him. So basically he knew through, I think he learned in season 2, and then he was there in the show. He kept being less and less on the show, but through season 3, and then he was gone. And then halfway through season 4, Chloe found out, and they did the whole thing of, oh well, she knows, but Clark doesn't know she knows, for about half a season, and then in beginning of season 5, she kind of forced his hand because she was freezing to death in the ice palace.
Right. But yeah, I don't really know if they thought, it's kind of the same thing of the big thing in the 80s and into the 90s was the question on sitcoms or whatever, when they wanted to have a romantic through line of will they or won't they. And I will be totally honest, like, that if once I started smelling that on a show, I was out, including The Office. Like, everyone talks about The Office. I'm like, I was out, dude. I did not care about...
That stuff was so annoying. Yeah. I feel like they stopped doing that. I don't know. I'm
Parks and Rec is the
Parks
first
and Rec,
show.
exactly. I was just going to say, it was the first show I can remember being like, thank you. This makes sense. They're going to just go ahead and go there and get married. Yeah. And it didn't change the show.
Right.
Done. And they're acting like humans.
Yeah. You don't want to be driven insane by the characters that you're watching.
Yeah, well, it makes you hate the characters.
Yeah. And you know, God bless him, but Welling was a model. He wasn't an actor. He had to be in every episode. He had to be in a lot of every episode.
Well, and it was physically exhausting, too.
Yeah, I mean, he was having to do effects, and he's sleeping like 4 hours a night while the show's going. I mean, something.
And like he said recently on the podcast, he was in almost every scene at the beginning.
Yeah, but he's not a great actor, and so sometimes you have people acting their little hearts out across from him, and every time they cut back to him, you can insert "duh." Like, it just feels like his brain is just flatlined.
You know, the best I think he was with Rosenbaum. There was something about their relationship where they just clicked.
I think Rosenbaum got him to listen, which is the kind of the key to acting, right?
Yeah.
And I think with some of the other actors, he was doing like this thing of I can't react to anything they're saying because that'll give away the game and give away the secrets and lies.
Right.
And so it ended up actually hindering him in what are supposed to be these emotional scenes. And I'm like,
he did better.
He just feels like he's gaslighting everybody all the time.
He did better in scenes with people that knew his secret.
Yeah.
Like his parents or Chloe or, Pete at the time. Or any number of Justice League members. Like, there were so many people that actually knew his secret before Lois did. It was absolutely ridiculous. But I do want to go back to Rosenbaum for a second, because we need to talk about Lex, because he was a big part of the show.
Who?
I do want to bring up two things that I thought.
You have a lady boner.
Interesting. No. I mean, he's a great actor. He just, I know there are people that have Lex boners. I just don't. Anyway, I thought it was really strange that a 21-year-old CEO was friends with a bunch of 14-year-olds. One. And they even talk about that on the podcast. Like, they make fun of it. It's funny. But also, like, you understand kind of why Lex goes crazy, because he is being completely gaslit by Clark and his family. And
then Chloe.
And then everyone. Yeah. Like, everyone is lying to him.
Yeah, so definitely that my thesis for the show is Lex is right. Like, everyone lies to him. His father, everyone he tries to get close to, lies to him constantly for absolutely no reason. Yeah. Other than, well, you can't be trusted, but he has shown no reason he can't be trusted at the beginning.
In the beginning it's, they don't trust him because they don't trust his dad. Which, Lionel's an evil mofo, but he's not his dad.
I mean, I'm trying to imagine a world in which a bunch of people, like, living in a town like Smallville wouldn't be, like, hurling themselves at a billionaire businessman. But, I mean, they do try and set up the John Schneider, knows what Lionel has done to the town and whatever. But also, as good people, you should not judge somebody by what their parents have been up to.
Exactly.
So it's a really weird conundrum they set up of failing to show why Lex is untrustworthy for like 2 seasons when all he's trying to do is help.
Yeah.
And literally every time someone like scrapes a knee at the Kent farm, he's like, I came as soon as I heard. Like, that dude is more up in their house than like the mailman. Like, he is always there.
When Lex showed up in the series finale, like Back from the Dead, it's like in the ruins of the Luther mansion, and Clark shows up. Ryan looks over at me and he's like, I came as soon as I heard. And I just started dying laughing.
But it's insane. It's like, and I'll be very curious if, as the Talkville podcast this kind of spills out, it's something I'm sure they didn't think about as the show is going along. You know, Lex is the bad guy, and you know, just he's just going to be Lex eventually, so he's got to do these things. But I think it's the kind of thing that would get caught now. Like, they would know they needed to set up, like, Lex as being narcissistic or megalomaniacal or, you know, all the things we think of Lex as being. And...
Well, they were also constantly going to him for favors.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I'll get in good with the Kents. I want to be pals with Martha and Jonathan. And...
Like, even Lois, like, got into college because of him.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck?
It's like, have a little gratitude.
Right?
Practice gratitude, y'all. It's a strange ass show in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't know how writers' rooms used to work. And I know it's 20. We keep saying, oh, it was 22 episodes a year. But it's like, it's also your only job. It is literally your only job. And it feels like stuff that would have gotten caught when I was in like screenwriting 101 in college. Of someone in the room would have said, I don't understand this character's motivation.
Yeah.
Like, and it wouldn't have just been Lex's. It would have been like, why is Jonathan like such a hard ass on this guy? It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't feel like they ever had those conversations. They just said, no, we got to do this cause.
Yeah. I talked a lot in the last episode, if you listen to it, about how much I enjoyed reading about the show. Uh-huh. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. Because it was so fun to just pick apart and go, none of this makes sense. Why is any of this happening? Yeah. This should be what is actually happening. Like, there were a lot of those conversations during the show.
And I think there used to be rules, because people used to be, if you're younger, you don't know this, but people used to be very weird about stuff that was published on the internet, of like, don't look at it, you know, whatever, it's on the internet, it's not real, you know, whatever. And by the time you got to even, like, I remember when Supergirl was on the air, maybe season 3, like, they would take these big mid-season hiatuses, and you could always tell what they'd picked up that was driving people insane online, because they'd immediately fix it after the break. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, why is this that way, or why is this so stupid, or whatever. And so they clearly were like, oh yeah, right, that would be a problem. And I know that's when I talked about Marvel earlier, like, that's one of their practices is, what would the nerds on the internet say? How would they destroy this?
Yeah.
And you have to be able to do that. And they just, with this show, it was too early. They just really didn't do it. And I think it came out of, you know, it's impossible to tell people who were not there for, like, the first Melrose Place in 90210, which is deep in the genes of this show, how stupid those shows were. And you watch them because they were that stupid.
Yeah. I think sometimes when they did actually try to make corrections, when they weren't getting the right reactions, they learned the wrong lessons. And I will give you an example. It's how they tried to fix Lana. So,
which time?
The first time, the first go around. Like, they kept doubling down and tripling down on her, and it just got worse and worse. But she was the love interest in season 1, and you were supposed to be rooting for Clark and Lana to get together, and yet there was this other more interesting character that people liked better, and that was Chloe, who also really loved Clark. And people
it made no sense.
It made absolutely no sense. And you're like, well, this person is really pleasant and fun to be around, and she's really, really super cute. And Lana's kind of a buzzkill. And they kept, their answer to that was to keep on giving her things. Like, now she owns a coffee shop and runs it as a 14-year-old, and now she can do kung fu because she had one lesson, and now she is an art student studying in Paris, and now she's a witch. Like, they just kept throwing things at the wall with her, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And she was really into horsies. Well, she was always into horsies.
Yeah, she was in the horses. I mean, when the character was first introduced, she's the sad orphan
from next door.
Oh,
because he's got a telescope, and he's like, oh my god, the telescope. The peeping Tom.
Let me point my phallus at you. Yeah, that was super gross. But yeah, she was introduced as the cheerleader with the horse. And frankly, I wonder how much more successful that character would have been had they adhered to that instead of constantly feeling like
they needed to change her,
make her more the. And it's funny because, like, I think in season 10 is the reunion episode, and they kind of make fun of it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, she was so hardworking. How many girls go to high school and are a cheerleader and run a coffee shop?
They kept piling things on to show you, oh, look how impressive she is. Like, what you need to do is humanize her. She doesn't feel like a character you can relate to, and that was the problem, and they never understood that. No.
And I don't watch enough of these types of shows, to know. And I don't. It was interesting too because it was part of the trail of going, is the show aimed at me or for me? Like, I want to say in season 3 was when the Neutrogena ads hit, and it was like, oh, I'm watching a show for young girls. Like, and that was when they really got into all the, we're going to spend 20 minutes of Lana yelling at Clark about not telling her the truth.
Secrets and lies. Yeah, and I know that she had some younger fans. They were out there for sure, but I think they were like a lot younger.
Yeah,
than we were.
Yeah,
because they bought into the she's pretty and she's the cheerleader and likes horsies and.
Yeah, but as a character, I mean, straight through until she was written off, was by and large a buzzkill. And then even when they tried to do the air quote fun episodes like the vampire episode, it just felt dumb and awkward.
Yeah,
it just felt. That was to me, that and the witch episode were like two of the worst written episodes because they just didn't make any sense. They would just do the thing where they got lazy and were like, oh, well, we want to do a thing with vampire sorority. Like, you tell that had been written on a whiteboard somewhere.
Yeah, these are the things that need to be in here. Lana kisses a woman, like Lana bites Chloe on the neck. She pushes Clark across the room. Like, these are the things that are checked off.
Well, didn't even know how college worked. And all of those people should have gone to college, but they're like, oh, I applied late admission. My friends, there's no such thing as late admission except in like community college. College
had been going on for a month before Lana showed up.
Yeah, that's like saying, I'm going to join this flight currently in progress.
And then she rushes a sorority, which, no, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, that's not, like, if you ever were on a college, and that's kind of the weird thing is I assume the people who do the writing, there's at least a few people in the room who went to college.
You'd think.
And paid attention enough to know, like, oh, remember how every year at the beginning of the year you'd see Rush happening? But that, and just even the math of the vampire thing of, like, they only take one girl a year. I'm like, how long has this been going on? How many people are in this sorority? And how many bodies have the cops had to pick up that they can trace back through? The last thing they were supposed to do was drop by this house.
Yeah.
Like, none of it. And I know they're like, it's stupid. And that's the thing that drove me nuts was knowing they decided it's a superhero show, it's stupid, and it doesn't matter.
Well, and also, Chloe has all this evidence, shows up at the Daily Planet with all this evidence. Mm-hmm. And Carrie Fisher. I mean, we talked about the guest stars in the last episode, but Carrie Fisher was on. She's amazing as the editor. And basically says, like, you're a good writer, kid, but this story's garbage. So that's how she gets hired on the Daily Planet, which is...
That story, by the way, from what Chloe should have learned, should have blown the lid off LexCorp.
Yeah.
Whatever it was called. LuthorCorp. And should have absolutely taken everybody down in that company, or at least caused major, major headaches and raised all sorts of questions. And if she actually had a research, which all they would have done is applied more, like, is this all true? Well, we need to apply more reporters to this. Uh-huh. And look into it further. They never, in a million years, would have buried it if there was actual, like, police records around any of this stuff. So it was stuff like that just felt just freaking lazy. Like, Superman, there's he comes from kind of a pastiche of, like, in comics have changed a lot over the last 80 years, but he was the thing that was amazing that showed up, right? It's for the first 5-10 years of Superman comics, it's Superman versus, all humans, right? He's not fighting aliens really at this point. World War II is going on, so they're kind of focused on like saboteurs and like crazy stuff, like arms dealers and a lot of social, like, this is going to drive everybody nuts, but social justice stuff of like, hey, you're forcing people to live in slums. I'm going to tear this down and rebuild it, and now these people are living in nice homes, and I can do it because I'm Superman, and you can't stop me. And that was the point of Superman, right? He was the guy who you can't shoot and you can't hold him, and he's going to do the right thing, kind of despite whatever the forces are. And that's why in the 80s it became so interesting of having this kind of like corporate overlord figure of Lex, of the who's really pulling the strings in modern America or the modern world is really this kind of figure. And I'm not saying like you have to take it super seriously, but like once it just becomes, he's not a singular figure operating within the real world, sort of verisimilitude, it just becomes nonsense. It's why people made fun of comics. And the younger audience, if there are any younger people listening, won't remember this, but growing up, if you were reading comics, people thought something was wrong with you. They thought you were like mentally challenged or something. And this show doesn't do anything to really fight that, right? I mean, I watched those episodes and said, this show is now stupid. It's basically indulging in all the things I don't care for. I'm out. And I'm good luck finding a bigger Superman fan.
Yeah.
I can name 4, but good luck you out there finding another one. And it's kind of crazy that they decided what to do with their time was to be that lazy. And then sometimes I know they thought they were just having fun, but it's like, well, your fun feels like nobody tried.
Yeah. So. I mean, I feel like my favorite episodes were when they did bring like other DC characters in. And we referenced the guest stars last time, but not necessarily even like names, but I mean, well-known actors. But like Phil Morris, is that his name? Came in to do Martian Manhunter, and I loved every time he was on. Like, he brought like a gravitas that the show like really, really needed. And a little sillier, but they brought in the JSA later on. But before that, it was Aquaman and Cyborg, and all those episodes were the ones that, like, not Clark based and not Kryptonian based, that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think once they got kind of past the first few seasons and they wanted to, because I think the first one was the Aquaman episode. If maybe
the Flash one, yeah. But we didn't watch that one,
and it's not very good if my memory serves. They did this really obnoxious take on Bart/Barry Allen. Yeah, but I'll never understand any of that. But and I was, you have 22 episodes a year. I don't really care what I care about is what the Flash TV show turned into, which is it's just all superheroes standing around talking to each other about other super things happening. Yeah. And you've completely divorced yourself from like humanity existing outside your door. Well,
and you had said during our rewatch, you like after one, I believe it was in season 9 when all the Kryptonians were around, but you're like, literally everything is Clark or Jor-El's fault.
Yeah. Everything in the show you could tie back to Jor-El strapping his kid into a rocket and opening a wormhole to Earth and letting a bunch of kryptonite fly through.
Or it's the supercomputer that he built, or
the science experiment he ran.
Yeah.
And then Jor-El's yelling at Clark constantly, or things get screwed up because Clark's lying to everybody. And it's
like, these are problems you created.
Yeah, it's like, and then the show has the balls to have the characters by season 8 referring to themselves as heroes. It's like, you don't get to say that.
Yeah.
That's something other people get to call you.
Right.
I mean, which is a major, like, just, and they do that now on all the CW shows of like, well, the heroes are doing this. And it's like, can you imagine sitting around thinking about you and your coworkers and going, well, we heroes, and saying it and like not being ironic?
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. And clearly nobody knows, and I'm just repeating a blog post I wrote recently, but Lois thinks journalism is propaganda for whatever your personal pet cause is, and spends all of season 10 basically going, I'm going to do nothing but promote my boyfriend in the paper.
Yep.
That's crazy. And it was totally unnecessary. Mm-hmm. Totally unnecessary. They could have easily had her writing articles, doing, story, because that was the concept of why he was in a newsroom, and had this snoopy, girlfriend reporter, she was getting into trouble because she was like, I'm going to go look into what's going up with this gang over here. Whoops. Now I'm, tied to a robot flying through the air or whatever, and now Superman's got to come save me. And instead, she's, worrying about, Cat Grant's writing articles that are, and I'm like, what's going on in editorial at the Daily Planet?
Yeah. To me, this show is the worst example of show not tell.
Yeah.
Because they had to talk up everything, and half the time it didn't even make sense.
If they maybe in the episodes we watched a lot of season 10 episodes. Mm-hmm. I think maybe they showed Clark just helping a random person and not just dealing with his own bullshit like Checkmate coming for him. Mm-hmm. Maybe for a minute.
Yeah.
And it's like, I understand you're telling a story. It's not about watching vignettes but throw it into an episode every once in a while.
Yeah.
Show them.
It's like a 30-second thing.
Yeah.
Helping a kitty or a kid.
Yeah, they had that one bit in the opening for a couple seasons where Clark was like shielding the kid as the meteors were coming down.
Yeah.
Also, those meteors his fault. Both rounds.
Exactly.
But he is at least helping somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, the idea is Superman is here to save the day. He's not here to clean up his own shit.
Yeah.
And that was really the problem with all the Kryptonian stuff to me.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, I know you talked, and I have a very different level of fandom, but especially on this rewatch, I had enjoyed her the first time, but the Tess Mercer storyline in this, in Cassidy Freeman.
Yeah, I think I like Tess more because of just Cassidy Freeman than the way the character was written. The character was written all over the map.
I actually liked that with her.
Well, I mean, yes, you can have an anti-hero that starts out, not so well-intentioned and or has just wrong ideas, mm-hmm. and then transitions. But like out of everything Smallville, the writing wasn't 100% on that.
Yeah, and what was interesting to me was kind of the push-pull they kind of introduced of she's actually like Lutessa Luthor. You got to have an LL name, right? Right. And that she is struggling with this knowledge and kind of, where she showed up and what she has valued up till this point. And it is a genuine example, they never say it out loud, of Superman kind of inspiring somebody and helping them. She shows up basically wanting to get with Clark.
Yeah.
And you pointed out something I had not really noticed before of like Cassidy Freeman plays that interestingly. Yeah,
like and this is not Supermanly of him, but he likes to choke people to get information in the later seasons. It's freaking weird.
They figured out an effect where they could have him lift people by the throat, which they hadn't had in the prior seasons.
Yeah, he even dangles her off a building in one episode. And she gets off on that.
Yeah, she yeah.
Like you can see it in her eyes.
Kind of hot.
But yeah, and like to our point earlier, so she figures out he's Superman before Lois. Like she knows in season 9.
And that was kind of the fun thing to me about the character was she's supposed to be super smart, and she connects the dots.
She is. Yeah.
So yeah, but then you have the bullshit at the end of the show where they murder her for no reason at all, and then they erase all of Lex. It was like none of the shit needs to happen. You we said it earlier, like you're at the 1 yard line, and instead of like all we got to do is just like have the line pushed forward, and you just follow them through.
Instead, they just drop their pants and take a dump.
Yeah.
Because they erased all of Lex's memories, and like they didn't even make it specific, like, this will make it, like, because you could do that on sci-fi shows. Oh, this will make you forget about Clark's identity. No, they said this will make you forget everything. Okay, well then technically that means
they could have whipped out any goddamn octagonal shaped thing they wanted to at that point, slapped it on his forehead.
This is Kryptonian technology that will make you forget all about Kryptonians. But no, they said you'll forget everything, which. Okay, so now he doesn't know how to read?
Is he a baby in a diaper now? Like, what what does this mean?
Anyway.
But now he's the president 7 years later?
But clearly not, because, I mean, they did continue it on into the comics, and he's, fully functioning adult. He just doesn't know about Clark. Which is stupid.
Yeah. They actually did that in the comics at one point, by the way, where he basically, Lex spent 5 minutes in the tub thinking about who Superman might be, and was like, oh... And they were like, "Oh, we have to have him forget," and so they had that part of his memory get erased, and then he was very vexed because he couldn't figure out what he couldn't remember.
Yeah,
he just knew something was missing. So that was probably around like 2003 or so. But it was really weird because they tried to tie it into his whole motivation all along had really been that he'd been jealous about Lois Lane, and I was like, no, Lex is just bad. It's fine. I like Bronze Age Lex, where he has Silver Age too, where he has like his little secret hideouts full of statues of like Genghis Khan and stuff, and he's just like, evil for evil's sake, Like, if I was gonna go full supervillain, that's exactly the supervillain I'd be. I'd be wearing like a gray jumpsuit.
Yeah.
I'd have like statues up of like Jack the Ripper and stuff, and just be like, my idols. So yeah, Lex is all right. No, but I think Rosenbaum is it was an interesting thing for him to leave the show. It put them into a really interesting spot, partially because they were able to do what they did with Tess, but it also meant that they weren't constantly circling the drain of whatever was going on with Lex as he went increasingly batshit. And I kind of enjoy the last season or two he's on, where he's just like, I'm done with you people. And they're at that point, like, at odds. Because, like, the season, by the time they, like, he's, like, making, like, clone armies and shit.
Right.
By the time he's out.
Yeah.
Briefly has his flirtation with Supergirl, where he thinks he's seen an angel and he needs to change his ways, and that doesn't
pan out. No.
Oh, we haven't talked about Laura Vandervoort at all.
No.
And
she wasn't on for very much, but her character being around was detrimental to Clark's progress, because she was already flying. She already, like, immediately on Earth, like, wakes up out of her spaceship and can do all this stuff already, and he can't. So
make it make sense, show.
Yeah. And she's flying around without a secret identity, like.
Well, right. They would have given away the whole
Well,
thing.
yeah, it's like, oh, this is my cousin, and she can fly. Like, huh?
They did try and do some, like, oh, she's a meteor freak thing, briefly. I think that was how they covered for it. But I thought that what they tried to do with Lois and Clark, where he basically, like, once he's embraced Lois and like, I'm going to marry her and it's my humanity, like, you see him try and fly at various points, or he floats in bed or whatever. I understood the kind of, like, symmetry and poetry of what they were trying to do for whatever Smallville was. And I really like that. But everything else is at odds with it as far as the show goes. It's like, well, how come the Kandorians have their shit so together emotionally? They don't seem like they do. They seem like a cult. So why can they do all the things?
Yeah, that made no sense. Like,
they get boner vision?
Yeah, they got their powers because they got a hold of Clark's blood for some reason. And then, again, just like Supergirl, they can all immediately fly.
Yeah.
Make it make sense.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
I mean, this is kind of like when everyone else was like, oh, yeah, because being online and around other Superman fans online, there's a lot of people who absolutely love this show. And and you, of course, love the show. And
I have a love-hate relationship with this show. There are things I love about it. There are things I love to bitch about with this show.
But I can't watch it uncritically. And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of was always my beef with it was, why am I sitting here watching this thing and like, I'm not paid to do it. I'm thinking about this for an hour a week, and I'm like, hole.
Oh, yeah.
Why is this happening?
Yeah.
Like, hire a dork, go to any comic shop and see who buys a stack of Superman comics and pay them a wage, and they will help you.
Yeah, they didn't want to bother.
Yeah, and I think some of that changed a bit. I know, like, by the time they're doing Supergirl, like, Sterling Gates was working on that, who is the world's second biggest Supergirl nerd. And anyway, it just bugged me when I was watching the show. I watched it eventually because I was like, yeah, it's not great. It's kind of trashy and whatever. This isn't necessarily my Superman, but it's a Superman, and I want to be literate in it, to some extent. But I couldn't get too emotionally attached to the characters. I wasn't having like a reaction to much that they were doing, other than kind of noting in my mind as like, oh, that was better than this show usually is, which is not really where you want to be.
Yeah.
Like, I have visceral reactions sometimes when I'm watching Superman and Lois.
Mm-hmm.
Like the finale of this year, like when Superman went full Superman at the end, and like when he was saving the sub and stuff, I was like, yeah, that's Superman. That's my Superman right there. But on this show, I'm just like, like the finale, I'm just like, oh fuck, like this is so bad. This is just embarrassing.
It was. I mean, but I think that's why I was in it for the supporting characters.
Yeah,
it's like, this Clark kind of sucks a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
I think Erica Durant's, for as bad as the writing was, managed to kind of sell that you could believe this person was going to just bulldog their way through whatever was going on. And she definitely provided a figure that you can see someone like in a very different way from, like, Lana was just like high school infatuation, where Lois felt like they spent a lot of time in season 10 making sure you understood how these two connected.
Yeah.
I thought that was some of their better stuff they did like that.
No, I agree.
Which is why the 11th hour will they or won't they felt so bizarre.
Complete bullshit.
But I think she was better on that show than people really want to give her credit for, or at least whatever she does as an actor.
Yeah.
Which is now mostly confined to Hallmark movies.
Yeah. Speaking of acting, I mean, we haven't brought up Justin Hartley yet.
He got better as the series
He
went
got
on.
so much better. I think he came like almost directly from soap operas. So you can tell in his first episode, it's real shaky. And he seems nervous. One, he's acting across John Glover for his very first scene. So that had to have been intimidating.
Yeah.
But yeah, by season 10, he was like way more sympathetic than Clark. Like, he was much a better actor.
Yeah.
Very, very easy on the eyes, so that didn't hurt. But also, it was nice to have like another hero on the cast full time for him like to bounce off of. Honestly, took the fall for a lot of stuff, because he like was the one that, oh well, he has the dark story because he killed Lex, and he's gonna out himself in season 10, which I think he does in the comics, so that's actually accurate. So he had to deal with that. But I
think that's been overwritten now, by the way. It doesn't matter. Keep going.
Oh, I mean, but it's there's
happened.
precedent there for it. Anyway, I enjoyed having him on the show, and he was one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think it really helped sometimes in the scenes with Welling where when they could just do a thing of like the Getaway episode where they went to the weird Scottish inn.
Escape. Yeah.
Yeah.
They tried to do this rom-com episode, which was honestly like one of the most enjoyable because it was like based on all the characters.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because it was like, this is what superheroes do when they're on vacation.
Yeah.
And just a really cute scene with him, with Oliver and Clark at the breakfast table where they're like, hey, you been up to save any orphans recently? Like, how's that new bow going? You know, it was just so cute and felt natural and made you really connect to the characters.
Yeah.
And you're like, why don't they do this more often? I want to watch this show all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's when you point at something like, I really enjoyed Ms. Marvel, that was recently on Disney Plus, by the end of that show, you're like totally cheering, not just for Kamala, you're cheering for the whole family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of you know how all of them interact, you've seen them talk about what they're having for dinner, you've seen like how they interact when the parents are, like the humanity in the characters. Like if you're gonna spend time on a show, maybe spend less time on, it would be fun as if they were all vampires, for an episode.
Yeah.
Like, I get it, you want to do a Halloween episode, whatever, but, focus on those moments of humanity because that's really when the super stuff, and that's where I think Superman and Lois is also succeeding, is the kids are fucking up at school.
Yeah.
They're having problems romantically, but they also have this other shit going on. So it feels like you can cheer for them more. It's not just shit happening on a screen.
One of my favorite scenes that's almost a blink and you'll miss it is in the episode Beacon in season 10. It's one of the Chloe episodes, so she's back. And this was a problem that they ran into, especially later on in the show, where they really focused on, well, I don't know if it was a time constraint or what, but they just two people in a scene. And then you'd have to like pass information and then repeat information. Mm-hmm. But there was like a scene where they're all sitting around watching a vote on the Vigilante Registration Act.
Yeah.
And it's Lois and Clark and Oliver and Chloe and Martha all sitting together in the Kent farm together. Like all this little superhero family. Mm-hmm. There and it just like, it was so heartwarming, and I wish that they had done that more.
Yeah. And it was something, I think comics struggle with this a lot. You can tell kind of some of the better comic writers versus some of the other ones, because a lot of comic writers come in and they write as if they're writing a video game, right? Here's the conflict. Here's the big bad. Here's how we're going to progress. And sometimes there's room for that. But also, one of the things that made X-Men as a comic so successful back in the 80s that just blows my mind that to this day that editors haven't figured out is they spent a lot of time having issues that were downtime. Of like, the X-Men are playing baseball. Here's Colossus talking to Wolverine about his girlfriend problems. And
that stuff's so fun to read and to watch.
It's character building, and
yes.
It's so absolutely vital. And to see these characters kind of interacting with each other and having, if they care about each other, then you will care about them more. Mm-hmm. And I think that is when you have them constantly doing the stuff they're doing for so many seasons on the show, like just gaslighting each other and they keep saying, "Oh, we're friends." I'm like, I have seen no evidence that y'all are friends.
Yep.
No one here should be talking to each other.
Yeah.
At one point, you're like, Clark should not talk to Lex, Chloe, and he certainly shouldn't talk to Lana ever again. Like, that would be my advice to them as a guidance counselor.
The worst thing that I saw Clark do on this show was, okay, the finale of season 8 was one of the worst episodes. Maybe not as bad as the finale.
I don't remember what happened.
Well, no, that was the Doomsday episode where he fought Doomsday for like
hilarious.
Yeah, for like 30 seconds, and then came back and they said, "What happened, Clark?" And he literally says, "I don't know."
I jokingly said, "I don't know."
Yeah,
and that's
before
what
he says it. Yes. And then, so basically, like, it ends with, in the Watchtower, Jimmy and Davis, who is the human who turns into Doomsday, basically. They separate him from Doomsday and killing each other in front of Chloe.
It was fucked up.
It was fucked up. And then Clark showing up. He didn't come to the funeral for Jimmy, but he shows up afterwards, and she's in tears, gives him a big hug because, you know, he showed up. And he's like, very woodenly, because it's Tom Welling, goes, I am not human anymore. Clark Kent is dead. And then just leaves her there.
Yeah.
Fucking leaves her there. How Supermanly.
Yeah, and I understand we're supposed to be on, like, a route, but there should be a connect the dots to get to who that guy is who's, like, waving the flag, right? And anyway, yeah.
It was just bad.
It is hard to describe how it felt like something had gone wrong around, and I would love it, you know, that the Talkville thing will get there in like 3 years.
Yeah.
And I will absolutely listen to that one to hear like what the hell happened.
Yeah.
Because something had to have happened as that season was wrapping up. But anyway, I think we have probably talked people's ears off about Smallville. Do you have any other remaining thoughts?
I don't. I just want to give a quick shout out to Angel, who is my Twitter friend, who has been kind of through this with me. She's one of my fellow Smallville fans who I met online, and I talk to quite a lot. Not every day, but frequently. And she was doing the Smallville rewatch with us for a while, but I think we outpaced her a little bit because we were going really fast. So thanks for hanging in there with me,
I had
Angel.
to do it as a pull off the Band-Aid thing. Or
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna make it. If you watched Smallville, I can't imagine that you're still listening if you weren't a Smallville fan or whatever. But I'm sorry if we dogged on it. If it's your favorite thing, we try and be as even-handed as we can as we're doing these things. But after 20 years with this show at this point, I sometimes have a very hard time articulating to people who love this show, like, and it's hard to talk about with people who really love it, of like, look, I just think it has enough issues and that it keeps me at a distance. Not all media is equal.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool that it has this fan base that has really stuck by it. It's basically providing an income at this point still for the people who are on it through cons and all that. Certainly through podcasts. And I'll be curious. I bet it has a second life here in the near future because the people have really stuck with it. And it's weird that it hasn't had merchandise. Like Buffy has kind of consistently had lunchboxes and shit. The comic series hasn't ever really stuck, which has kind of blown my mind. But I think it's kind of due for...
It probably ran for a year, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember it running more than like 18 months.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on this a little bit in the last podcast, if you listened to it, but I will never get invested in a fandom like I did with this. I kind of burned myself out and learned my lesson. Like, it was too much. I mean, it was kind of, this is going to sound like so dumb, but it was there for me when I needed it. Like I said, when my mom passed away. But like the heartache of like the whole Allison Mack thing was just too much. And it was, the fact that it upset me that much meant that I was in it too much. And I can't ever do that again. It's too much.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that. I mean, I care about the things I care about, and I kind of feel like my thing like that was the New 52 reboot. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't buy DC Comics really for years, which anyone who knew me prior to the New 52 would currently be clutching pearls and having to deal with their vapors. But it was absolutely devastated me when DC took that hard turn that direction, and was, it wasn't for the same reasons. It wasn't, but I too have felt betrayed by my fandom, Jamie.
Sure.
So yeah. I get it.
So it's best to just enjoy things as they come along, and not engage as much.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I've always been fascinated with fandom. We can have a whole separate podcast on fandom at some point, but I've always enjoyed the things I enjoy, but I can definitely tell from talking, and I have a room full of Superman shit. Like, let me be like real clear. Like, it's
overflowing out of that room.
It's a hoarder's paradise of Superman shit.
I am at this moment looking at a foot and a half tall Superman statue that is in our dining room.
Yeah, that's going to make its way upstairs. Don't worry, honey. But I've never really considered it to be like a lifestyle to pursue or something to, and it's just kind of like the way it gets engaged with by many people. I don't see it as a community thing in a lot of ways, and so that has always kind of kept me at a distance. Yeah. But we can talk about this more on a different podcast.
Yeah, we probably should.
But yeah, I mean, I think that in the great continuum of Superman stuff, going back to 38, you have the first comics come out. By the 40s, you have the first serials coming out. It starts becoming a newspaper strip. Superman's been all these things over the decades. This is just one more. And a lot of them have been, I mean, if you've ever seen the Filmation cartoons, they ain't great. And there's been a lot of bad comics and everything else. And everyone kind of finds their different route in and all that. I do know there's a generation out there who still says, Welling is my Superman.
Yeah.
And all that. And I get it. Reeves my Superman, or George Reeves is my Superman. And that's cool. I mean, there's all these different ways you can kind of come to the thing. But I think at the same time, don't take off your critical viewing. Like, you're still allowed to do that. I know you're not going to do that all the time.
And that was what was fun to me about this show.
Yeah.
Because I was allowed to be critical about it and still enjoy it at the same time.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if I have anything really else to say about Smallville that won't get me in trouble. So I think I'll stop it there. But any final thoughts?
Somebody save me.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye-bye.
Cars parked, bags are packed, but what kind of heart doesn't look back? And the comfortable glow from the porch, the one I will still call yours. All those words came undone, and now I'm not the only.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.